So, if you're a company looking for advice on how to navigate climate change, or you're a government who wants to spend billions of dollars going green, or just a concerned citizen who wants to know the real deal on the ground, there truly is just one person that you want to turn to, and that's Christiana Figueres. She's been involved in climate change for about 25 years and as executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, helped broker the COP21 Paris Agreement in 2015. It was a global promise to limit global warming, and many call this a historic turning point in the fight against climate change. Christiana, it is a sincere pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Alex. However, I must say, I am gratefully not the only person to talk to. I used to, many decades ago, know almost everyone who was working on climate change. And the good news is, I don't know even 1/10 of the number of people who are working on climate change because there are so many people doing an astonishingly good job. So that's actually very, very good news that it's no longer just friends and family. It's actually a much larger community that can also be used as reference. So good news on that one.
So you're not the only one on people's speed dial anymore. Fine, fine. We'll give you that. But
No,
I would
no,
like
no,
to get
no, no.
I would like to get your perspective, though, just before we drill down the current COVID crisis and the climate change crisis. Can you tell me how you look at them and how they're similar?
Yeah, they're similar in some ways. They're different in others. They are. Let me start with the similarities. First of all, I hope one lesson that we're taking from COVID is that science-based policy is better than fictional policy. And when we turn to those who know what they're talking about, we probably do a better job. And that's being shown by all of the countries who have been following their health professional advice on COVID are doing much better. And that should be a lesson learned for climate change. The other thing that is similar, of course, is that it is a crisis that we perfectly well could have prepared for because we have known for a while that we would be prone to these pandemics and we actually didn't prepare properly. Now, how are they different? Well, they are different in the sense that we will eventually find a solution, find a vaccine for COVID, and we will be able to get most of the over most of those effects. But there is no such vaccine for climate change. We're actually already too late to completely avoid climate change. We will be able to skirt away from the worst, but there's no vaccine for climate change. The other thing that is quite different is the scale and the depth of the damage. Yes, in the United States, we will have about 200,000 people dead from COVID probably this year, if not more. But the scale of human misery, premature deaths, economic destruction that can come from unaddressed climate change goes way beyond that. And certainly is something that only gets worse, gets incrementally worse, and will be borne out over quite a few generations. So much longer term and much
Mhm.
graver consequences on climate change than on COVID.
Well, also, I'd wonder too that, with COVID, you can deal with your own country and then just lock down your borders, right? You can't really do that with climate change. You need everyone to, in some way, buy in to help reduce emissions and limit emissions. What do you do to a government that doesn't get it? What do you say to them?
Actually, Alex, I would agree with you that you can close your borders or you can close the front door of your own home and be sort of safe for the time being. But this lockdown that we're having, a personal lockdown, economic lockdown, is not something that is sustainable over the long run. We cannot run the global economy in this situation. So, in order to get to what I call phase two, which is normalization of economic activity, we do have to have a global solution that can no longer be pursued by building walls around ourselves or building walls around the countries. Because let's think about it this way. in order for us to be able to get back to commercial trading, to traveling, to the all of the interchanges, now
Hmm.
international interchanges that we always do, we will have to travel. And if 7 billion people do not have the vaccine, then we're always as exposed as the weakest or most vulnerable person. So the fact is that in phase two, countries will have to collaborate. And in fact, even the companies that are developing these vaccines will have to collaborate with each other in order to develop the vaccine, in order to produce the numbers that we need, in order to go through all of the admin loops that have to be going to, all the permitting, and most importantly, in order to distribute it fairly to every single human being on this planet. Because if we don't do that, we will still have a hole in the boat. And it's just not true that if anybody is in the boat with one hole, it's just the person sitting next to the hole that's going to sink. We all sink.
Hmm.
And that's true for climate as well.
So it's sort of like a dress rehearsal then in terms of working together, but it's still the same question. I mean, even dealing with COVID, there are different countries that have very different understandings and opinions about the disease. So, what do you say to countries when it comes to climate change who just don't get it, who's not willing to spend the money, they don't want to buy in, they don't want to do the work? What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, you can hit your head against the wall and make all the arguments on climate that you want. I tend to think, Alex, that oh, without denying anything on the science of climate and on the reality, maybe one way with these countries or leaders or corporations that are being so closed mentally is not to talk to them about climate, but to talk about to them about, well, where do you want to go? What is your long-term interest? And find that sweet spot between where they want to go in long term, um, and with or without climate, frankly, and where we need to go. So let me speak very concretely. Corporations that are still today in 2020 not moving toward incorporating environmental and social and governance issues into their strategies. I don't mean on page 79 of their annual report, I mean front and center into their strategies. Are corporations that will not survive over the next few decades because their customers, citizens of all countries, especially young people whose brains they need to hire, have much higher expectations of corporate responsibility. And so those corporations who want business continuity will have to have business transformation because those two things come hand in hand. And the same thing goes for governments. So you don't necessarily have to tattoo climate change on people's forehead. You can just sit down and have a rational discussion about where do you want to go? What is the future that you see? And how are we going to pursue that?
So the other question I have is, what kind of policies that you've seen? So as you say, there's a lot of experts now, et cetera. You've been doing this for a long time. What kind of policies actually work? I guess short, medium, and long term. And I ask that because, at least in the US, a lot of pushback from certain areas is that if you're a coal miner and you shut your coal plant and you open a solar plant, that coal miner loses his job. And like that coal miner doesn't necessarily get that solar job. And it's not a quick turnaround. So for them, it's a real significant loss. And at least here in the US, that has led to a lot of difficult lack of transition, really, in certain areas when it comes to climate change. Give me an example of what's good.
Absolutely a very important point that you're making, Alex. If we close our eyes to that reality, we have completely lost the battle here. So what we call a just transition, which is to ensure that no one is left behind, that either to take the coal miners. Coal miners have possibly been living off of the coal industry for one, two, three, maybe even four generations, and they don't know anything else. That has been their reality. Sadly, if that's true, they have very, very bad health because they will have black lungs from their exposure to this. So many of them, and especially the women in those families to whom I have spoken, are very concerned about their husbands, about their sons
Mhm.
continuing in the coal industry because they know where that leads. So you don't close a coal mine just overnight. There are many, many paths, there are many steps that you have to take in rehabilitating and be able to close a coal mine. There are many jobs to be had in closing a coal mine. And here I would like to actually highlight the government of Spain, that I think has done a better job than most other governments in precisely closing coal, because that has been now their promise in order to protect their young generations, but doing so in a very sensitive way where they are creating the jobs that are necessary for those mines and those plants to be closed over time in a safe and permanent way, creating those jobs while they take the young people and retrain them for the new kinds of jobs. So it is a very important component of a smooth transition to be able to bring these people on board into a new reality that is actually going to be healthier for them and will ensure that they will have jobs for a longer period. Because the fact is, Alex, coal is on the demise in the United States not because of climate change, but just because many other sources, all the renewable energy sources, are cheaper than coal, and because there has been so much automation in the coal industry that there's very little human jobs left. So it is unfair to leave these people stranded. We have to bring them along into the economy of this century.
So whose job is that? Is that the company that runs the coal mine? Is that the government who does that?
I think it's a public-private effort, and that's certainly the way that Spain is doing it. They are working with coal companies in order to first of all set out the strategy and know exactly how many people are depending on these jobs, where they are, what their skill sets are, and then there is a public-private effort of everyone together in order to be able to move these people into their new opportunities.
What other things have you noticed, like policies from other countries that have really worked? It doesn't have to be with coal miners, but something that has really worked to implement something new, whether it's subsidies or an infrastructure package or dealing with a grid. I mean, what works?
Well, we used to depend on subsidies for renewable energy. That's not necessary anymore. It's not necessary because certainly wind and solar, and especially offshore wind, are now so competitive that they don't need the subsidies anymore. You think about it, a new technology usually needs subsidies in the beginning, but once you get to a certain volume and certain technological development, those costs come down. So subsidies are no longer necessary. What is very interesting, for example, to bring about even more penetration of renewable energy on the global grid, although we're already at 25%, and very excitingly, most of the new power that was added into, in fact, more than half, yeah, more than half of the new power that was added in 2019 was either solar or wind. So we're moving in that direction. Why? A, because the cost structure is reflecting that we're being able to to structure the cost of energy being generated and delivered into the grid such that there is an incentive for clean energy. Also, because we're beginning to invest into smart grids and into much better interconnection, which is necessary for efficiency. And thirdly, we're beginning to invest into storage capacities, among them batteries, but not just batteries, other technologies that allow storage so that you can have clean energy 24/7, 365 days, which currently we don't have. But that technology is coming forward. So it's not just about pushing forward a specific technology. It's the whole package. It's the structure. It's how the energy is stored and then delivered at the right moment so that there can be demand response. It's about how it is distributed. We need much better grids. All the grids in the United States are actually quite old and very inefficient. And we should not be wasting energy on inefficient grids. So the fact is there is a complete modernization of the entire energy or electric system that is necessary, and those investments are starting.
Right, so let's get to that because a big part of the European Recovery Fund for COVID, that 750 billion euros, a lot of that's earmarked for clean energy and the green transition. France also unveiling that, Germany unveiling a portion of that. So countries are doing it on their own and then as a whole unit. We also might hear this week from Ursula von der Leyen that we may see ambitious cutting targets emissions for 2030, not 2050. That's a huge difference. It's a 20-year difference for cutting those emissions. If they came to you, and they might have, and said, all right, give me the top three things we need to spend the money on and how much we should allocate and what we should do, what would you tell them?
You know, Europe is at a point of maturity with energy generation that they don't need to inject terribly much more there. They're at the point where they are investing into the intelligence of the grid, the interconnection of the grid, and certainly into storage. Now, Europe also, because it's an old continent, is totally inefficient in its homes and buildings. So another very important part that Europe is beginning to do is they're beginning to invest into efficiency, whether it be of their insulation of buildings or efficiency of just the devices that we have at home, because they didn't have that before, and a lot of that is very old. Their electric grids, their infrastructure is very old. So it's fascinating because what they're doing is they are really looking at where do things need to be brought into the 21st century, injecting the capital there, creating those jobs, and building the whole infrastructure and the structure that is necessary, the regulatory structure, the cost structure that is necessary to take everything to do with renewable energy to the next scale.
How quickly should governments move?
Yesterday.
But is there any risk of moving too fast?
No. I mean, no matter how fast we move now, we're already moving slowly. You know, honestly, had we been doing what we're doing now 20 years ago, we would be in a much better position. The fact is that we have delayed so long that we now are really looking into the precipice. And that's why so many of us have been saying that this decade, these 10 years that we have from 2020 to 2030, are, without exaggeration, the decisive decade in the history of humankind. Because there are many paths toward decarbonizing the global economy. Science has projected, I don't know, 150 or something like that, different possibility of paths to decarbonization. But every single one of them goes through the eye of one needle. And that needle is halving emissions, 50% cut of current global emissions by 2030 at the latest. So what we have now, we have to cut in half over the next 10 years. Now, if we do that, the exciting thing is we open the door to a world that is so much better than the world that we have now, because it'll be a world where cities don't have contaminated air, they have clean air. So we can save at least 7 million lives per year that we're losing to air pollution. We will have much more energy independent. Every country will be able to produce the energy that it needs. It will not be polluting. It will be right there being produced close to where you need it. We will have efficient transport. None of this ridiculous transport mess that we have right now, particularly in developing countries. And I speak I hear from Costa Rica, beautiful country, but with ridiculous transport. We don't need to be condemned to all of those outmoded technologies that we used to use last century. It's a little bit like condemning us, to the horse and buggy when we already know that there are many other much more advanced modes of transportation. I mean, honestly, to still be using the internal combustion engine in 2020 is the equivalent of, still wanting to go out there and fetch hay for my horse. No, we don't need that. I mean, if you have a horse because you like to ride it, okay, but not as your method of transportation.
Well, I'm sure Elon Musk would probably agree with you on that. So the other thing that I hear, particularly in the U.S., I don't know how it is in other countries, maybe you can help me with it, is that eventually the consumer pays. So Duke Energy, which is the U.S.'s largest electric utility, said, look, we can cut greenhouse gas emissions by more than 70% over the next 15 years, say in North and South Carolina, but it's going to cost you up to $58 a month. And that becomes a problem when someone can't make ends meet. That $58 becomes quite significant. Is that real? How do you deal with it? What do you think?
Well, I haven't looked into those numbers. I did hear that Duke came out with that number, and I haven't scratched the surface of that. But it does seem a little bit difficult for me to understand that, especially because the Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley in California recently put out their report saying that the transition to 90% clean energy in the entire United States by 2030, which is what is in Biden's plan, can be done at no increase in cost for customers. And why do I think that logic is actually pretty understandable? Because renewable energy technologies are constantly going down in cost, constantly, because we're still at the incipient stage of the development of these technologies. And renewable energy now is cheaper than coal, but here's the weird thing: it will never be as expensive as it is now because it continues to drop in price. And so I really, I saw those $58. I just think that's difficult, whether, they are taking into account a whole bunch of investments that maybe are ancillary or pressing themselves into a time frame that doesn't make too much sense. I honestly don't know. It just doesn't jive with all of the other studies that we have seen.
Well, fair. Have other countries done something similar where utilities said, all right, look, we're going like 100% renewable by this time, and they didn't pass cost on? Like, were there mechanisms or business plans that they used that worked?
Well, an example that I would like to bring, not from a utility, but from an oil and gas company, because I think that's pretty impressive, is the BP announcement, British Petroleum, that announced just a month ago, I think on August 4th, if my memory doesn't betray me. They announced that they are going to not drill for 40% of the oil and gas that they own in reserves, that they're going to leave that in the ground, and they're going to be investing much more into renewable energy. Now, here's the fascinating thing about that announcement. The day after, the stock price of BP jumped by 7 points. How interesting is that, right? Because you would have thought that shareholders would have been panicking. Wait a minute, this has been our business model for, I don't know, 80, 70 years of that company. And now you're going to change the business model, and you're not going to be extracting oil and gas, and you're going to be moving over to other energies. What do we know about that? And you would have expected a huge, tanking in the price of the share. Not so. It actually went up. Why? Because investors are really beginning to understand that if they want to protect their asset value that they have invested in all of these companies, they have to move over to the safer assets that are the clean energy assets, and away from the ones that they know are polluting locally and globally and are by now stranded assets. So I thought it was a very brave move on the part of BP. And I hear in the halls that they may be coming out with yet another announcement. And when that happens, that's one of the major oil and gas companies of the world. And when one major moves, there is somewhat of a herd mentality. And I think that we're going to see movement on many other oil and gas companies moving in the same direction.
So as we round out the conversation here, you're doing such a good job about moving it forward and staying positive. So I just wanted to get your take on, how do you feel today in the climate change conversation than you did, say, 5 years ago? And how do you expect you're going to be feeling in 5 years? Like, what are the things you're going to be thinking about, the conversations you're going to be having?
I think about scale and speed all the time, because we're definitely moving in the right direction, but we are not moving forward at the speed that we should or at the scale that we should. So I'm constantly calibrating in my mind scale and speed. Now, I co-host a podcast, Outrage and Optimism, and we have many CEOs that we interview every week from the largest corporations. And what I have been fascinated to see over the past 3 to maybe even 6 months is how these CEOs are no longer thinking, should they transition? They are all grappling with the question of how do I transition, and how do I transition again at speed and scale. And they have very, very much incorporated this thinking into their strategy, because they know the time for tepid attempts or pilot projects is just completely over. This is the time for audacity in the transformation. And they're really moving forward quite impressively, quite impressively. You saw Amazon that put out this climate pledge and said we're going to be climate neutral by 2040. Very impressive for a company that honestly hadn't, just a year ago, was barely on the climate change scene, had no leadership publicly. They had been doing things internally, but certainly not publicly. And then you have Microsoft and Apple that go 2040, we're going to do it by 2030. And so, you're now beginning to see this very, very interesting competition of the spiral going up, because companies are realizing that as soon as they set really ambitious targets and they give incentives to their people to innovate and be creative, just amazing things happen that they had no idea were possible. IKEA is another fantastic example. IKEA wants to be climate positive. Climate positive, that means they're going to be absorbing more carbon than they're emitting. And the leadership there really incentivizing everyone to just think completely, not just out of the box, but without a box, and bringing in all kinds of ingenuity and innovation into their process is just fantastic.
Christiana, that was such a great way to end. I really appreciate your optimism. Christiana Figueres, not the only person anymore on your speed dial when it comes to climate change. Thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you, Alix. Thank you very much.